John Deere just unleashed an economic shockwave no one saw coming. In a ruthless effort to slash costs and boost profits, the company shut down its U.S. factories, laid off American workers, and shifted production to Mexico, crippling the 34.5 billion American farming industry in the process. How could a single corporate move bring American agriculture to its knees? Why did Trump's retaliation fail so spectacularly? And could this mark the moment U.S. farming lost its global dominance for good? One decision changed everything. For nearly 200 years, John Deere stood as the backbone of American farming. But when the company blindsided the very people who helped build its empire, rural America was left reeling. Trump didn't treat it like just another policy issue. It was personal. When he learned of Deere's outsourcing plans, he saw more than corporate greed. He saw a betrayal of the farmers, factory workers, and rural voters who had helped elect him. At a fiery rally in Des Moines, Trump didn't hold back. He called Deere's move treason against American workers and promised swift retaliation. His plan? A 200% tariff on every John Deere product made outside the U.S. The announcement sent the rally crowd into a frenzy. But on Wall Street and in corporate offices, panic set in. Trump's plan was bold but risky. Those tariffs wouldn't just hurt Deere, they'd also raise equipment prices for American farmers. That's when the backlash started. The very people Trump aimed to protect, the farmers and rural voters, began turning against John Deere in ways no one had expected. And this was only the beginning of a storm that would reshape the heart of American agriculture. For generations, farmers had stood by John Deere, paying premium prices for its equipment, because they trusted its reliability, durability, and American-made heritage. But when word spread that the company was outsourcing jobs to Mexico, that deep-rooted loyalty morphed into fury. The betrayal hit hard. These weren't just consumers. They were Americans losing a symbol of their identity. From coffee shops, to county fairs, to farm supply stores, the sentiment was the same. It felt like a trusted family member had turned on them. But the frustration wasn't just about the job cuts. Farmers had long been at odds with Deere's increasingly restrictive repair policies. The company had locked essential machinery behind proprietary software, forcing farmers to pay outrageous fees to authorized dealers for even minor fixes. That stranglehold only added fuel to the fire, turning outrage into revolt. Independent mechanics were pushed out, and farmers were left without control over the tools they relied on. John Deere's decision to outsource was the last straw. Protests erupted. Online boycotts gained traction, and perhaps most significantly, farmers began turning away from John Deere altogether. Instead, they looked to competitors like Kubota, Case IH, and AGCO, brands that respected their customers by offering more repair-friendly policies and keeping jobs in the U.S. and the Midwest, where the iconic Deere logo once adorned barns and silos. It was being painted over in protest. Dealerships that had depended on John Deere's sales for decades started reporting steep declines in business. This wasn't just a symbolic rebellion. It was full-blown economic warfare. John Deere's leadership had badly misjudged how quickly loyal customers could become bitter opponents. But the revolt wasn't just coming from the fields. It was also rising from the factory floors. The very workers who had built the machines, tractors, harvesters, and combines, turned against the company they had once proudly served. When the outsourcing news hit, longtime employees were blindsided. Many had dedicated their entire working lives to John Deere. For them, it wasn't just a job. It was a livelihood, a legacy. Communities in Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin were built around these factories. Entire families depended on them. So when the closures were announced, anger turned into protests, walkouts, and picket lines. But it wasn't only about losing jobs. It was about the way it was done. Workers accused the company of abandoning American labor, while executives enjoyed massive bonuses and soaring profits. The betrayal cut deep. Unions, including the United Auto Workers, mobilized fast, launching strikes and demanding the company reverse its decision. They urged the government to step in and accuse Deere of prioritizing greed over American lives. Images of furious workers picketing outside shuttered factories made national headlines. Their signs said it all. Deere sold us out and bring our jobs home. Still, John Deere refused to budge. Executives defended the outsourcing as a necessary move to stay competitive in a global market. But while they held their ground, the consequences were already spiraling. The ripple effects reached every corner of the farming industry. As tensions rose, so did the prices of essential equipment. Tractors and harvesters, once considered the heartbeat of American agriculture, suddenly became unaffordable, and the industry was about to face a storm like never before. These weren't luxuries. They were lifelines. But after John Deere shifted manufacturing to Mexico and Trump imposed retaliatory tariffs, the cost of essential farming machinery skyrocketed. What once cost a struggling farmer around $60,000 suddenly shot past $100,000, and that was just the beginning. The first major blow came when Trump slapped a 200% tariff on John Deere equipment produced outside the United States. Intended to punish the company for outsourcing, the tariffs ended up punishing American farmers instead. Every new cost passed down from Deere landed squarely on the shoulders of those who could least afford it. Deere responded like most corporations do, by shifting the burden to their customers. Almost overnight, the costs of purchasing, maintaining, and repairing tractors doubled, and the tariffs weren't the only factor. The outsourcing decision triggered a logistical nightmare. Parts that were once sourced domestically now had to cross international borders, pass through customs, and survive a tangled global supply chain. Shipping delays, customs inspections, and rising fuel prices all piled onto the final sticker price. Each time a part was held up or a shipment stalled, it was the farmers who paid the price. Literally, small farmers were hit the hardest. A generation ago, they could finance new machinery and gradually pay it off over several harvests. Now, rising interest rates and growing financial uncertainty made banks reluctant to issue loans. Without access to affordable modern equipment, farmers couldn't plant or harvest efficiently. That led to lower yields, tighter margins, and shrinking profits, creating a vicious cycle that threatened to collapse entire operations. As new machinery became unaffordable, demand for used equipment surged. But even the second-hand market spun out of control. Farmers were shelling out premium prices for tractors and combines that were years, sometimes decades, old. And just as farmers were fighting to keep their equipment running, they faced another crisis that struck at the heart of their workforce. While headlines focused on Trump's tariff war and the chaos surrounding John Deere, a quieter but equally devastating collapse was unfolding across rural America. The loss of labor. For decades, the backbone of U.S. agriculture had been immigrant labor, especially undocumented workers who handled the grueling, low-wage jobs that many Americans refused to do. These workers planted, tended, and harvested crops from sunrise to sunset, keeping the food supply chain alive. But when Trump intensified immigration enforcement, rural America felt the shockwaves first. Sweeping ICE raids, aggressive deportations, and stricter border policies caused the available farm labor pool to plummet. By 2018, the effects were undeniable. Crops were left unharvested, fields lay fallow, and entire harvest seasons were jeopardized. Farmers weren't just losing machines. They were losing the very people who made agriculture possible. The Department of Agriculture estimated that 70% of U.S. farm workers were foreign-born, with many being undocumented. When those workers vanished, so did the crops. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Fields brimming with ripe strawberries, lettuce, tomatoes, and countless other fruits and vegetables were left to rot. Farmers across California, Arizona, and Florida admitted publicly that they simply couldn't find enough labor to harvest their produce. In some cases, entire harvest seasons were wiped out, and millions of dollars worth of food was lost in the fields. The labor shortage did push wages up for the few workers who remained, but that didn't solve the deeper problem. Farmers already burdened by skyrocketing equipment costs and shrinking crop revenues couldn't afford to pay higher wages without going under. Small and mid-sized farms suffered the most. Many had already taken out loans just to keep their operations afloat and were now stuck facing an impossible choice: raise pay to attract labor or risk losing everything come harvest. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, farmers were hit with yet another blow, this time financial, and it swept across every field, every farm, and every small town in rural America. It all started with the price of corn. As the price of corn collapsed, It dragged the entire agricultural economy down with it. The year 2022 marked the beginning of this new crisis. Global overproduction of corn, soybeans, and wheat flooded the markets, with countries like Brazil, Argentina, and India ramping up their agricultural exports. The result was a sharp drop in commodity prices. Corn plummeted by over 37%, soybeans fell 24%, and wheat lost 35% of its value. For American farmers already hanging by a thread, this was the final, crushing blow. When crop prices collapse, farmers are faced with two terrible choices: produce more to try to break even, or scale back and hope prices rebound. But either route led to disaster. Producing more required more fuel, fertilizer, and equipment, expenses that had already become unbearable. Scaling back, on the other hand, meant losing economies of scale, falling behind massive agribusiness competitors, and eventually facing foreclosure. The outcome was a wave of farm closures the country hadn't seen since the Great Depression. Small family farms that had survived for generations were sold off to large corporations or foreign buyers. Rural towns, once sustained by farming income, began to crumble. Schools shut down, local businesses vanished, and entire communities were left hollow. But the collapse wasn't just economic, it was cultural. Farming had always been more than just a livelihood, it was a way of life. That way of life was being wiped out by forces far beyond farmers' control: rising costs, vanishing labor, and plummeting crop prices. And just as rural America was being crushed by this perfect economic storm, John Deere made a bold new move. One that promised to revolutionize farming but instead deepened the divide. It was the automation gamble, and it would prove to be just as controversial as everything that came before. John Deere bet everything on robots, but forgot who they were leaving behind. As crop prices tanked and farmers fought to stay afloat, Deere doubled down on automation, pouring billions into self-driving tractors, robotic harvesters, and AI-powered precision farming tools. Executives pitched these innovations as the future of agriculture, promising to cut labor costs and boost efficiency. Autonomous tractors could operate around the clock without fatigue, while drones could scan fields with surgical precision. It sounded revolutionary, if you could afford it. But for the average American farmer, that future was completely out of reach. Deere's new autonomous machines came with jaw-dropping price tags. A single self-driving tractor could run north of $500,000. Precision farming software demanded pricey subscriptions, routine upgrades, and ongoing maintenance. The technology wasn't just expensive, it created an entire ecosystem that excluded smaller operators. Only the biggest corporate farms could afford to automate, while family-run farms, already battered by equipment costs, labor shortages, and plunging crop prices, were effectively shut out. Deere's gamble on automation didn't save farming, it deepened the divide between big agribusiness and rural communities. And it wasn't just a financial gap. As machines took over human jobs, what little employment remained in farming towns began to vanish. Communities that once relied on agricultural labor to survive were pushed into deeper economic decline. Deere had promised innovation, but what they delivered was another blow to the very people who had built their legacy. Yet the most profound consequences were still to come, because as America's farming system cracked under pressure, powerful forces outside the country were quietly preparing to reshape the future of global agriculture. The American family farm isn't just dying, it's being erased. For generations, rural America was built on small, family-owned farms passed from parent to child like sacred heirlooms. But today, those farms are disappearing at an unprecedented rate. Not because farmers have lost interest, but because they're being systematically forced out by an economic machine too powerful to resist. Over the past 40 years, the U.S. has lost more than half its small farms. What was once a landscape of independent, family-run operations has been overtaken by massive agribusinesses that dominate land ownership and control commodity prices. This wasn't a natural shift, it was engineered. Rising operational costs, vanishing profit margins, and government policies that favor industrial-scale agriculture have all conspired against small farms. The numbers paint a stark picture. In 1978, there were over 685,000 small farms in the United States. Today, fewer than 325,000 remain. That's more than 350,000 family farms wiped off the map. Their land has been sold, their barns left to rot, and their families forced to abandon a way of life that defined American identity for centuries. The reasons behind the collapse of American farming are complex and deeply interconnected. Skyrocketing, equipment costs, driven in large part by John Deere's aggressive pricing and restrictive repair policies, have made it nearly impossible for small farmers to keep pace. At the same time, falling crop prices caused by global overproduction and prolonged trade wars have slashed farm incomes. With banks tightening their lending standards, fewer family farms can secure the credit they need just to stay afloat. Then there's the generational shift. Many young people who grew up on family farms are opting out, choosing not to inherit the struggle. They've watched their parents endure grueling hours, economic instability, and crushing debt, and they're walking away for careers in cities or other industries. As the older generation retires or passes on, there's often no one left to carry on the legacy. The result is a landscape increasingly dominated by corporate mega-farms, massive operations with thousands of acres and vertically integrated supply chains. These agribusiness giants aren't interested in community traditions or rural preservation. Their focus is singular: maximize efficiency and profit, no matter the cost. And that cost has been devastating. As family farms vanish, entire communities are withering. Local diners, feed stores, equipment dealers, and small-town schools have shuttered. The social fabric of rural America is unraveling, leaving behind empty fields and hollowed-out Maine streets. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, nature delivered the final blow. It wasn't just trade wars or corporate greed that brought American agriculture to the brink. It was the climate. Farmers have always battled economic uncertainty, but now they face something far more volatile: extreme weather. Climate change has unleashed a relentless wave of disasters. Historic droughts have turned once productive fields to dust. Torrential floods have erased entire growing seasons. Wildfires have destroyed crops, machinery, and homes, displacing families and upending livelihoods. The statistics are grim. Since 2015, drought conditions in the Midwest have increased by over 40%. In 2019 alone, flooding in the Mississippi River Basin resulted in more than $20 billion in crop losses. California has seen over 4 million acres of farmland scorched by wildfires since 2018. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of an escalating trend driven by global warming. Rising temperatures have shifted rainfall patterns, extended drought periods, and intensified storms. For farmers who rely on stable seasons, this new normal is catastrophic. The economic toll is staggering. Insurance payouts for crop losses have soared, but they rarely cover the true cost. Decades of work can vanish in a single storm, and the fallout isn't confined to rural areas. When crops fail, food prices rise, supply chains buckle, and consumers everywhere feel the squeeze at the grocery store. Farmers can no longer plan for the future. Growing seasons are shifting, pests are surviving milder winters, and water scarcity is becoming a long-term reality. All the while, the political pressure cooker surrounding agriculture is about to blow. What began as Donald Trump's bold stand against globalization is now spiraling into a full-blown political disaster. His trade war, intended to punish outsourcing corporations and defend American labor, has backfired spectacularly, hurting the very people it was meant to protect and accelerating the unraveling of an industry already hanging by a thread. The situation is dire, but not irreversible. What's needed now is leadership, vision that goes beyond slogans and sound bites. American farming doesn't need protectionism or profit-driven automation. It needs support, equity, and policies grounded in reality. First, the federal government has to change course. For too long, subsidies and incentives have favored corporate agribusiness at the expense of family farms. That must be reversed. Expanding access to low-interest loans, offering financial assistance for sustainable practices, and reinvesting in rural infrastructure could give small and mid-sized farms a fighting chance. Without that, consolidation will only continue, and, with it, the hollowing out of entire regions of the country. Technology has a role to play, but it must be inclusive. Tools like GPS-guided seeders, moisture sensors, and climate-resilient seeds shouldn't be luxuries accessible only to multi-million-dollar operations. These tools need to be scaled down, made affordable, and shared widely if they're going to help revitalize the family farm. Precision farming should be an equalizer, not a wedge that widens the divide. A stable, humane immigration system is also critical. Without a workforce, crops don't get planted or harvested. That means enacting policies that recognize the essential role of immigrant labor in agriculture, providing pathways to legal work, and ensuring protections that prevent exploitation. The labor shortage didn't appear overnight. It was the product of political choices. It can be solved with better ones. Trade policy must be rethought from the ground up. The reckless use of tariffs to score political points devastated American farmers instead of protecting them. Future agreements must be built on cooperation, fairness, and long-term vision, not short-term retaliation. Rebuilding trust with global partners and ensuring American farmers can access foreign markets will be essential to rebuilding stability in the sector. Finally, the revitalization of rural America can't stop at the farm gate. It must extend to schools, clinics, small businesses, and broadband access. Farming isn't just about food production, it's the foundation of entire communities. Saving agriculture means saving rural America, and that will take comprehensive investment, not just emergency aid. The road back won't be easy. Years of neglect, mismanagement, and climate chaos have left deep scars. But if America is willing to rethink its priorities and put its farmers first, not just in words, but in action, there is still hope. Farming built this country. It can still help save it. India watched and waited, then struck with precision. As the United States descended into agricultural chaos, Mahindra, India's largest tractor manufacturer and a growing force in global agribusiness, began executing a long-term strategy that would quietly transform India into an agricultural superpower. While U.S. farmers struggled to afford equipment and maintain production, Mahindra offered the opposite: affordable, durable, and accessible machinery, tailored for small and mid-sized farms around the world. The company's tractors, priced at a fraction of what John Deere charged, began flooding markets in Africa, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Eastern Europe. But Mahindra wasn't just selling tractors. It was exporting a farming philosophy. Unlike Deere's automation-first approach that favored large-scale operations, Mahindra built tools for the everyday farmer, supporting small-scale agriculture and empowering local food producers in regions where access to capital was limited. Their equipment came with training programs, easy financing options, and maintenance support, which made them invaluable to emerging economies. It was a grassroots revolution in farming technology, and it was winning. Backed by the Indian government's aggressive agricultural investment policies, Mahindra expanded its footprint across dozens of countries. India negotiated trade deals that tied Mahindra equipment sales to crop export agreements, effectively bundling its agricultural technology with access to India's massive food supply. The strategy worked. While American manufacturers lost contracts due to political volatility and rising costs, India became a trusted partner for nations looking to modernize agriculture without the strings attached to Western economies. Mahindra's rise also reflected a broader shift in India's agricultural ambitions. The country poured resources into agritech, irrigation systems, and drought-resistant crops, not only to feed its own population, but to become a reliable food exporter. With climate change creating new challenges and food insecurity rising globally, India stepped in to offer both the tools and the crops needed to stabilize global supply chains. By 2025, Mahindra was not just a tractor company, it was a symbol of a new global order in agriculture. And for America, it was another stark reminder: the world wasn't just catching up, it had moved on. In the span of just a few years, America went from being the world's breadbasket to a cautionary tale, a combination of political missteps, corporate greed, and economic short-sightedness handed the future of farming to its rivals. Europe protected its base and expanded. Latin America seized the market. India rewrote the rules. Meanwhile, the U.S. was left fighting battles it had created, trying to recover from wounds that might never fully heal. The question is no longer whether American agriculture will lead the world. It's whether it can survive in the world it helped create.